All right, guys, so we're going to get back to talking about some of my some basic tactics. So I've done videos in the past, it's been a long time ago now, talking small unit tactics. Now I'm going to get to what could probably be more aptly called battle tactics, or a little bit more complex tactics. So the one that we're going to start off with today is going to be what's called defeat in detail. Defeat in detail. So what defeat in detail is, its most simplest sense, is basically whether I outnumber an enemy, whether we're evenly matched, or whether he outnumbers me. I want to try to find a way to engage small numbers or smaller parts of an enemy force with overwhelming force and defeat it, and then do that multiple times. Versus having some form of relatively evenly matched force, or if I'm outnumbered, obviously attacking a force we're relatively evenly matched. So for example, if my tactical magnets here. So we have a force that's even here. Attacking all like straight ahead would be, the most difficult way to do this. Conversely, if I were outnumbered. So now, obviously, this is fraught with its own potential problems. So what defeat in detail is basically, in some way I need to get an advantage over the enemy, all right? Which in this case means that I need to somehow occupy enemy elements. So I'm going to be able to deal with an enemy piecemeal. Now, as we start to defeat in detail here, now we start to chop an enemy up into pieces and be able to deal with them individually. So now, a few ways that this tends to manifest itself, typically speaking. So one of the most common ways this manifests itself is attacking an enemy that is on the march, i.e. they're going from point A to point B. It doesn't matter why they are. So, for example, we have an enemy that tends to be stretched out in simplistic terms and call them a march here, right? They're on some form of road or whatever. So, this could be as simple as, some form of ambush would be a defeat in detail, or being able to in some way fix enemy forces, which is a very foundational kind of word or concept. So in some way engaging through whether, skirmisher activity, guerrilla-related activity, ambush-related activity, and in some way getting some amount of an enemy force invested so that part of an enemy force can then be eliminated with superior forces. That's a very common way that this tends to happen. Very good historical examples. So probably the single best example of that ever happening is the Battle of the Teutoburg Forest in 9 AD, fall of 9 AD, where the Germanic tribes, absolutely massacred the Romans, killed about 20,000 Romans under Varus, who were marching through what would be like northwestern Germany, and probably the single greatest defeat that the Romans suffered, in that period. Another way that this manifests itself very commonly would be terrain related. So we have some form of terrain that is hyper limiting. And so an enemy is forced to split his forces just in order to maintain the march, right? So now we have relatively even forces here. So this would be, again, we could have holding forces or, delaying actions, things like that. We engage an enemy with overwhelming numbers, defeat in detail, maneuver again, and deal with them again in overwhelming numbers. This exact example is exactly what happened at the Battle of Tannenberg in 1914, when the Imperial German army absolutely destroyed the Russians under Rennenkampf and Samsonov. So they basically did exactly this. Specifically what happened is, as the Russians were maneuvering towards Königsberg, Königsberg's very fortified, and they were just moving relatively slowly just because they were running into a fortified area. But the Russians down here were not running into any such thing. So the Germans, basically through open communication, found out that the Russian units were too far away to support each other. So basically got all their troops together, bam, came down here, slaughtered the Russians, put them all on trains, moved them back up here, slaughtered the Russians up there near Königsberg. Again, defeat in detail, which is very conceptually simple, which is divide an enemy into smaller groups that can be then chewed up individually. Other tactics, sometimes this is called, sometimes it's called hammer and anvil guys who are familiar with the Winter War and the Second World War, so the Finns kind of called this mati tactics. So mati is their word for like a stacked pile of firewood. So as the Russians were very largely confined to the roads because of the obviously the severe Finnish winter and things like that, the Finns, who are very hypermobile, one because they're used to moving in that sort of terrain, but also very mounted on skis and things, were able to come down and basically divide these Russian units into smaller subgroups because of the terrain and because of their hypermobility, and kind of deal with them a little bit individually here and cause a lot of mayhem on there. So again, defeat in detail.